This just isn't the typical summer. Money's tight, like for a lot of people, right? Packers no different. So today, we going bargain hunting. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray. Yeah, today back to the original setup. Friday was such a nightmare to get Friday's podcast up. If you look at the video form, or even if you're on the audio podcast, it went out late. And I've been having some real problems with that lately, so going to go back to the roots a little bit here today and see if this one's a little bit easier as we eliminate some problems and try to get back to being able to upload just a little bit quicker. So like I said in the intro today, we are looking at a whole bunch of different options for free agents for the Green Bay Packers. Now, ultimately, what I really did was I looked at 7 free agent prospects at 3 different positions. And I think that these are 3 of the positions that are fairly universally agreed upon that, like, hey, Packers might be able to use some help there because maybe youth or just lack of quality is possible. So we're going to explore those positions. The very first one that I'm going to talk about is the quarterback position. Before I get to that quickly, though, just a programming note for you. On Wednesday, I'll be here as normal. On Friday, I'm planning on doing a live show. Yeah, another live Q&A hangout session. That'll be Friday afternoon. I'll get you exact details in Wednesday's show, but that will be occurring Friday afternoon. And then that will propel me into the 4th of July week where you will not see me for a week. Yeah, next week, gonna take a little bit of time off from the podcast, gonna focus on a few side things, gonna focus on why in the sweet goodness it's been so hard to upload anything lately. So I'm going to be looking at that and just recharge the batteries a little bit, work on a couple of the ideas that people have gotten me. Remember, if you want something, if you want me to talk about something, put it down in the comments below and I'll do my best to get to it in the coming weeks before we get to training camp. So now let's do this. Quarterback. Why do the Green Bay Packers need a quarterback? Well, we got Jordan Love, right? And he is your de facto, number 1 guaranteed quarterback 1. But behind him, you've got Danny Etling, who's not exactly the most experienced, and you've got Sean Clifford, a 5th-round pick rookie who universally, no matter how your feelings are on Clifford, universally was kind of accepted that he was going to go later in the 5th if he was going to get drafted at all. So the Packers could look at a couple veteran quarterbacks. And Brian Gutekunst has said as much as well, talking about how he's going to wait to get into training camp before really assessing what veterans may be out there. But hey, that tells you the wheels are turning, ain't they? And it's at least a possibility. So it's important that we do acknowledge that. Now, there are a couple free agents out there that I just don't think make any sense, be it monetarily, or the other reason being I don't necessarily want to see the Packers go after a guy who nationally is going to start a conversation of, he's there to compete with Jordan Love. If Jordan Love throws 4 interceptions in week 3, it's done. This new vet's going to come in. And to me, that's like Matt Ryan. No matter how well he played last year, dude still won an MVP in the past. So Matt Ryan I'm going to rule out, as well as Joe Flacco, going to rule him out as well, considering that he performed relatively admirably for the Jets last year. So the 2 quarterbacks that I'm really looking at would be Teddy Bridgewater and Nick Foles. Now, before I dive into those 2 players specifically, you may have two thoughts on the top of your head. Number 1 being, come on, it's getting a little late, isn't it? Sure, there's training camp signings every year, but to bring in a name like this at any one of these positions, isn't it getting a little late? Well, yeah, as a general rule, sure. The longer you last, the less likely you are to actually sign on somewhere. But I have a little bit of history for you during the Brian Gutekunst era. In 2018, on May 25th is when they happened to sign Mercedes Lewis for the first time. 2021, so a couple years off there, including the COVID year. But 2021, on June 4th, is when he signed Devondre Campbell. July 24th. Is when he signed Dennis Kelly, the offensive tackle who actually played some meaningful snaps for the Packers in 21. And then, of course, 2022, last year, July 20th, right before training camp started, he signed safety special teams ace Dallin Levitt. So it's not without precedence that Brian Gutekunst may go out and sign a few free agents, even at this late stage of the offseason. The other thing that you may be thinking is, Teddy Bridgewater made over $6 million last year. How are Packers going to do that exactly? They're not sitting on a ton of money. And you're right. As of right now, the Green Bay Packers have, according to Over the Cap, $16.5 roughly million available in cap space. Now, take away about 8 of that because it's going to get dedicated to Lucas Van Ness, Luke Musgrave, Jaden Reed, all 3 of which have yet to sign their rookie contracts. So that's going to take about 8 of that $16.5 million. So then you're sitting there with about $8.5 million left, and the Packers probably want $5 million-ish for their in-season piggy banker to carry over into next year. So how can they create some money? Well, they can restructure John Runyon Jr. to give him a couple million, maybe $1.5. A.J. Dillon extension to give him $1 million. Rashawn Gary extension would give him anywhere from like $3 to $7 million-ish, depending on how they restructured it. So as I talked about in last Friday's video with those extension candidates, there is some room to open up cap room right now from Rashawn Gary and A.J. Dillon. So is there a way the Packers could sign free agents yet? Yeah. Actually, they're in a good enough spot to where they could sign 1, maybe 2 of the names on this list. So just bear that in mind as well. Looking specifically at the quarterback position, the 2 names that I mentioned earlier, Teddy Bridgewater and Nick Foles. Why do you want either one of them? Are you really telling me that either one of them is that much better than Danny Etling, Sean Clifford? Heck, even Kurt Benkert. Are you telling me they're better than them? Well, maybe. In the case of Teddy Bridgewater, at least, last year he had extensive time in 3 games for the Miami Dolphins last year, threw for 683 yards over those 3 games with 4 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. According to PFF, he had 0 big-time throws, which that certainly isn't great, but he had only 5.4% of his throws were deemed as turnover worthy. Now that's a pretty healthy metric. And his average depth of target was actually a career high for Teddy Bridgewater last year, sitting at 9.8. Now, playing in the Miami offense for the first time, that's not exactly shocking when you've got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Like, they're throwing the ball down the field a lot. And Teddy Bridgewater, his numbers reflect that with a 9.8 ADOT being his career high. Looking at Nick Foles, though, you're looking at a guy who's going to be more player coach than anything, especially at this point. He is considering retirement, according to the latest rumors. And in his last 2 starts last year for the Indianapolis Colts, it left a lot to be desired. He threw for only 224 yards, 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Nearly 10% of his throws were turnover worthy. So does he have a lot left in the tank to play quarterback? Probably not. Might Bridgewater be better than what the Packers have? Yeah, I think that's still a relatively secure bet. So the question is, why would the Packers want a backup quarterback? Well, ultimately, is it to come in there and save the season if Jordan Love goes down? Probably not. But what it is it's a very important voice. Now, Jordan Love has some of the best coaching in the world from Tom Clements, right? And his counterpart, Sean Clifford, in the quarterback room is, as I've talked about on this channel a lot, he's been the captain everywhere he's been. Like the last 6 years that he's been an active player, he's been a captain everywhere. His intangibles are off the charts. But still, having a vet who's done it before, who's walked the walk that the coaches are telling him to walk, and who sometimes can be a translator between coaching and player, is not the worst thing for a young quarterback to be around. The Packers could do a lot worse than having a depth chart of Jordan Love, Teddy Bridgewater, and Sean Clifford as their top 3 quarterbacks. And I'm assuming it would be Clifford over Etling in that case since they spent a draft pick on Clifford. So just bear that in mind. There is room to improve, both intangibly and on the field, for the backup quarterback position. Moving on to another spot. And to me, this is the Green Bay Packers' number 1 need. Yeah, it's not a veteran wide receiver. It's not a safety. The number 1 need that they have on their roster right now would be the defensive line. I've talked in other podcasts about how the Packers they have a complete lack of playing time on the defensive line. Kenny Clark obviously is there, but TJ Slayton's only got a couple hundred snaps in his career. Devontae Wyatt played under 200 last year as a rookie, and then you've got other rookies in Carl Brooks. It's just, they're so young, right? And there's a lot of question marks about whether they're good or not, too. Wyatt, at times last year, absolutely outplayed Lowry. Okay, so that might be a little bit of an upgrade. Slayton, same thing with Reed. But then you got these 2 question marks on your defensive line as well. And let's face it, the Packers' defensive line for years hasn't exactly been this great thing that you want to hold on this pedestal. They've struggled a lot, especially against the run. So what could the Packers use at this point? Well, bringing in another defensive lineman probably secures the fact that they would maintain 6 defensive linemen on their active 53, at least heading into the year, their initial 53. But what it also does is if you focus these efforts on bringing in a run-stuffing defensive lineman, I'm not talking about like a 260-pound one that you're going to put out on the wing outside the tackles who's basically an edge. I'm talking about a big one. Like someone to stand up in the middle of the line, someone ideally with some nose tackle experience, even though there's not a lot out there, but someone who's known as a disruptor of the run game. So I'm focusing my efforts first and foremost right here on Shelby Harris. Played last year with Seattle. Before that, had a stint in Denver. He's going to be 32 years old. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. He averaged 518 snaps over the last 6 years. Factor in that like a defense cumulatively plays like 1,000 to 1,200 over the course of a year, and even that feels heavy. I mean, this guy's playing almost every other snap for you as a 32-year-old defensive lineman. You can do worse. He is predominantly a defensive tackle, but he has a little bit of nose experience, just not as much as you'd ideally want here. But the big thing with Shelby Harris, the big thing, is 76.9 run defense grade last year. He also had 20 stops. Now, a stop defined by PFF being a defender stopping a play before it naturally would. That put him in the top 30 in the NFL in stops last year, but his 76.9 run grade put him in the top 10 of the entire NFL last year. So you're telling me at this juncture the Green Bay Packers can go get themselves a 300-pound man who's in the top 10 of run defense on the defensive line? That's the kind of thing you want to go get right now since the Packers can't defend the run to save their lives. So Shelby Harris is candidate number 1 for the defensive line for me. Looking at candidate number 2 is someone who I haven't given a ton of thought to, a ton of talk to, or anything over the last 2 months. Would be Matthew Ioannidis. Played last year for the Carolina Panthers. He's 6'3", 305 pounds. He's going to be 30 over the course of the next season. He's a little bit more of a pass rusher out of the defensive tackle spot. A little bit less of a run stuffer than Shelby Harris, but still, big dude who can make some contributions. 2021, he had 34 pressures. 2022, he had 35 pressures. Both of those years, he also played over 600 snaps, be it for the Washington football team or the Carolina Panthers, respectively. One thing about him is last year his missed tackle rate skyrocketed to 19%. Historically, though, his career average hovers right around 10%. So is that an anomaly? Was it playing first time Carolina? But either way, it's not great. And over the last couple of years as well, he's averaged over 18.5 stops. But like I said, he's considered much more of a pass rusher than is a run stopper. Last player that I want to talk about is perhaps the most intriguing on the list and maybe the most far-fetched as well. And no, I'm not saying Ndamukong Suh. I'm not saying Akeem Hicks. I'm not saying any of the guys who are somewhere between the line of football career and nursing home. I'm not quite going that far. No, what I'm looking at is Wormley from Pittsburgh. Yeah, Chris Wormley. 6'5", 300 pounds. He's going to be 30 next year. Played 338 snaps last year. The year before, he played 729. So why the fall? From 729 snaps down to 330-something, that's quite the drop. And yeah, Pittsburgh just ultimately played him less. Now, he did play in only 13 games last year. He did miss a few games. So that, of course, contributes to a lower number. But the big thing with Wormley, and obviously the largest consideration when you're talking free agency, got torn ACL. Yeah, early December last year, playing in Baltimore, he tore his ACL. He had a successful ACL surgery on December 22nd of 2022. But Doughty's going to be ready for training camp. Doughty may even be ready for the start of the season. Keep in mind, Rashawn Gary tore his ACL in Week 9 of last year, and we're not at all certain that he's going to be around for Week 1. So would Wormley realistically be ready for Week 1? Probably not. Is he going to pass the physical right now? Yeah, probably not. But might he be looking for other employment from Pittsburgh, considering that Pittsburgh dropped his snaps so much last year? Because here's the real reason why I want Chris Wormley. 2021, before his role was drastically reduced, he had 7 sacks and 10 quarterback hits from the defensive tackle spot in Pittsburgh's line. Now last year it dropped precipitously down to 0.5 of a sack and only 1 QB hit. But still, 7 sacks, 10 quarterback hits, that's something you can work with. Also, last year, even in amongst this year where like he only had a half of a quarterback hit, his snaps are reduced, PFF considered him to be the 18th best interior defensive lineman in all of football, including a top 5 grade against the run. So, again, he's not true nose. He plays more of like a defensive tackle, but still, if the Green Bay Packers look kind of like Shelby Harris, like you're telling me right now, in their budget, they could go get a guy who's 32, be a top 10 run defender, they're going to do it, right? Well, in their budget right now, they could go get a 30-year-old defensive tackle who's a top 5 run defender, is a 300-pounder. You're telling me the Packers couldn't make room for that on their roster. Regardless of what you think of like a Jonathan Ford, Shelby Harris has proven to be a substantially superior player. And the Packers have room for this kind of defensive tackle, this kind of nose tackle, because Harris, Werbley, they at least have some experience there. They have room for this kind of player on their roster to improve their run defense. And I know, like I've theorized before, as have others, about like, do the Packers even care that they suck against the run? Or are they good? Like, do they just plan their defense to be at 2nd and 5? That's when you start planning ahead, right? Well, making additions like this is like what Snacks Harrison was supposed to be a few years ago. If you remember, the Packers were in the midst of a playoff run. It was one of those magical seasons, right? And everyone was clamoring for them to sign Damon Snacks Harrison. Come in, be the run defender that we need. He's the vet. He's the big boy. He can do it. And then the Packers actually did it, which is one of the few times I remember the Packers making a move everyone clamored for. And then he didn't do a lot. He barely played. But here's at least one step in the direction of a solution for the Packers to fix their run defense. My number one vote here would be Shelby Harris, but I absolutely would be checking in regularly with Chris Wormley to know how that knee is doing, how far out he is, get the medicals on whether it was a clean tear, whether he's got damage. I'd be calling, no doubt about that. And the last position that I'm going to take a look at, I've got 2 candidates for. The tight end position. Look, Packers have Luke Musgrave, Josiah DeGuara, Kraft, Tyler Davis, right? They've got already a full tight end room at 4 people, but Tyler Davis is only there on a 1-year deal. Tyler Davis really, at this point, we know serves the purpose of just being a special teams tight end, which is absolutely vital for Bisaccia. Kraft, Musgrave, we're not totally sure what their roles are going to be. Musgrave, of course, going to be the receiving one, given all of his tools. And then DeGuara, you've got as your H-back and probably your most heavily utilized inline tight end to start the year. I think that changes, but to start the year, it's probably where you have Josiah DeGuara. But there's a guy that I think most Packer fans would be just fine with moving on from Tyler Davis in order to bring back this veteran. Yeah, I'm talking about Mercedes Lewis. You know, his name has been traveling around the interwebs in the last couple of days. And it's all been because he gave an interview where he said, I just want to play. I just want to compete. And he even explained normally older veterans don't get a job for one of 2 reasons. 1, you see this massive decline in their play. Or 2, they want too much money for what they can offer now. And Mercedes said, I'm neither one of them. I just want to go somewhere and compete. I know Brian Gutekunst already pretty much shut the door on bringing Lewis back. But this is a young offense. In fact, you want to know how young? Let me just take a peek here. According to Bill Barnwell of ESPN, this is the 2nd youngest receiving and tight end core, going back through 1990, behind only the 2017 Browns, who went 0-16. 2nd youngest, going back through 1990. And the only ones that you're older than is the 2017 Browns, who didn't win a game. So there's something to consider here for the Packers, right? And I'm not saying that the youth is bad. Like, don't get me wrong. But Mercedes Lewis, when it was announced by the Packers that like he was not going to be returning, there were some players that were not thrilled about this. There were some players that put out tweets about how Mercedes Lewis is the epitome of a leader and they're going to miss him. You've got an incredibly young team. So don't you think bringing in a tight end who even last year was the 6th best run blocking tight end and the 11th best pass blocking tight end. Now, I know not all of you love PFF. I get it. I really do. And I know I quote PFF all the time, so I sound like a hypocrite. But I understand why you may not like it. Especially, though, when it comes to blocking. For me, their grading system is just... it's the most easy to explain, I don't know. I at least like their blocking grades. So here you go. You got 6th best run blocking tight end, 11th best pass blocking tight end. The Packers may be a more run-heavy team this year. Having a 6th offensive lineman would tend to help with that, I would think. So it's at least, again, worth the consideration. Look, I know when you put Mercedes Lewis out there, you're basically telegraphing what you're going to do. I understand. But it could be worth it. And he could show the young guys. Dwyer not exactly old. Musgrave, Kraft. Could show them, 1, how to be a professional, but 2, the ins and outs of being a tight end in Matt LaFleur's system and perhaps speed along their development. We're not talking Mercedes Lewis is getting like a 4-year contract. No, he's going to be there for 1 year. That's what it would look like. And if you're not going to do Mercedes Lewis, as I've said before on this channel, I'm not going to dwell on this a ton because I've campaigned for this before. Just based upon the numbers alone. I don't know much about the guy, but just looking at the numbers, if you don't want Mercedes Lewis, fine, call it Max Williams. 29-year-old tight end from Arizona. 2022 was injury-riddled. It wasn't very good, so go back to 2021 when he was a top 10 blocking tight end. And if you really want a reason us to go get Max Williams, I know it's a few years ago, but if you go back to 2019, he was the top pass blocking tight end and the top run blocking tight end in the entire NFL. Dude was top in both. Packers could use a 6th offensive lineman in the form of a tight end. And Mercedes Lewis, Max Williams at this point, neither one's going to command a lot of snaps. So is that not better for your team than Tyler Davis at this juncture? Certainly things to think about, but that gives you 7 free agent candidates that the Green Bay Packers should, could, can, pick whatever word you want, consider to improve their roster before training camp. Hope you're having a wonderful Monday. I will see you on Wednesday, and as always, go Pack Go.